Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Lukman Nation. If you are watching on Black Power Media on Facebook, that is the only way, other than on Twitter and on Twitch, that you can watch watch Black Power Media. Because if you have not heard, Black Power Media on YouTube was given a strike this week for an episode that of the Hate Awards that had not even aired. The algorithms scanned the content and found content that the overlords at YouTube considered harassment and bullying. The topic was actually about pedophiles and pedophile priests and some folks who have been previously held up as paragons of some type of virtue, only to find out later that they were, vile pedophiles. But YouTube doesn't like saying mean things about pedophiles. So uh, Black Power Media was given a strike. We are not on YouTube, cannot stream to YouTube for 7 days. I forget which day this is. I think this is day 4 or 5. So in the middle of next week, we'll be back on YouTube. Just wanted to let you know if you were not aware of why you can't find us on YouTube. But I'm so glad those of you who have joined us are able to join us tonight wherever you have found us, whether it's on Lukman Nation on YouTube, whether it's on Black Power Media or Lukman Nation on Facebook or Twitter or Twitch. Thank you so much for joining us. Yes, we are considering alternatives. We don't know what those are going to be yet, but those are conversations that we are having because this is not the first time Black Power Media has had this problem with YouTube. And of course, it's not the first time that Black radical outlets on YouTube have had this problem. So stay tuned for what this is going to look like. I don't know, but thank you so much, Michael Coffey, James, Bruce 420 Lee 2, Trey Legal 2 Fs, Jamam Mom 93, Chitmacha. Thank you all. Thank you all, Quaker Anarchist, for joining me tonight for our monthly episode of Blackonomically Speaking with our resident economic expert, Dr. Linwood Tauheed. And I'm very, very excited that we're doing this show tonight because we get to talk about something that Dr. Tauheed has been directly involved in Kansas City. So no more editorializing from me. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Linwood Tauheed. Dr. Tauheed, thanks so much for joining us again.
Good evening. It's always great to be here, Sister Jacqueline. You're looking well today. You're looking energized and beautiful on the screen. So
Oh,
it's wonderful. Wonderful.
thank you. Thank you so much. I feel pretty good. Little tired. I had a procedure this morning to take the CVC access catheter out.
Mhm.
So that has been removed because the fistula is working well for dialysis. But I'm feeling pretty good. Just moving
Good,
along in this process.
good to hear.
Fantastic. So I want to point out that my dear heart, Ricky Ryan, is joining us from Bluefields, Nicaragua. That is amazing. She's on a delegation to Nicaragua to commemorate the 44th anniversary of the Sandinista Revolution. I am working on some content for Hood Communist that connects the struggle of our people in this country to the struggle of the Sandinistas to maintain their self-determination in their country. And I just got some new information today that I'm very excited to include in this piece that will air in Hood Communist. I'm hoping to have it done by next week. But I think as I'm talking about this, and I had said the other day, Dr. Tauheed, that I really want us to begin thinking about when we commemorate the anniversary of the Sandinista Revolution in 1976, I think it was, July 19, 1976. I really want us to start thinking about that commemorating the Sandinista revolution with the struggle of African descended people in the United States and our fight against the a concurrent war that was waged on us, the war on drugs, right? The whole
Mhm.
crack epidemic, the war on drugs, and how that, I think, can play into this discussion about reparations that we're going to have tonight and that we need to have in perpetuity until they are realized. Um, so just starting off, what do you think about that? As I'm kind of thinking about this piece that I'm working on, and I'm connecting these concurrent struggles for self determination.
Mhm.
Black people struggle for self determination in this country against this war waged on us by the government that they call the war on drugs,
Mhm.
that happened at the same time, that was actually a result or a byproduct of the war the US government waged against the Sandinistas,
Mhm.
fund using the Contras. And the connection is crack. And the fact that the Contras were running lots and lots of cocaine to make up for the money that they couldn't get from the federal government, from the US government, and from the U.S. government's allies. Those weapons cost a lot of money, and the U.S. government really did not, over the table through legislation, allocate a whole lot of money, as much money as was needed by the anti or counter revolutionary forces, the Contras. How do you see those kinds of struggles among our people in the reparations discussion?
Well, excellent question, and a far ranging question, bigger than reparations. Certainly, it is of international scope, and the type of things that are uh, being planned and fomented in the world today are by and large, at least in the West, right? What we call the West, are by and large being dictated by American policy. Now, American policy, if you take the naive view, American policy is directed to bringing democracy to the world, of helping others to develop economically and socially. This is what we are told. But when we go back and we look historically, and if we have a view of what's going on internationally today, we find lots of contradiction between the reality and what is being presented as the American system of values, and the American process of helping others to become more free, liberated, and healthy, wealthy, and wise. If we want to, be go into more mythology, and so all of these struggles around the world, in my opinion, of course, are joined because there's a common entity
Mm,
that is going in the world against the things that it preaches to the world. Reparations is certainly part of that, and when we look at an international level, we can find that the countries of the global South, what we call the global South, we have lots of ways of describing the other, right?
mm,
Third world is a term, even though it didn't originate in the West. It came from persons who were in other countries who were understanding that third world meant the world that was given no significance to the West, right? But we don't like to use that term anymore. We talk about developing countries. We talk about emerging economies. It's very much an economistic way of thinking about things. In other words, you think about others in terms of of what they can do for you in trade, as opposed to thinking about their history and the social devastation that has been brought to them by Western countries
Mhm.
now being led by the U.S. Not all the time
Right.
in this last 400 or so years. Actually, I would go back to 1492. We need to go back a little further, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in that time period, it wasn't always the U.S. was not even a country then, not even a
Right.
place, at least not even a country by definition of Western country. There were obviously people here who thought of themselves as nations, as multiple nations. But since the hegemony of the Spanish and the Portuguese that transferred over to the British and the Dutch, and then after the 1776, that time period, that hegemony has fallen into the hands of the U.S., which is very much a global power enforcing its need for growth and development for itself on the rest of the world, regardless of whether or not that results in growth and development elsewhere. We're living in an interesting time in that we're seeing the development of a multipolar world, a the rest of the world, which we have to understand. The rest of the world is the majority of the world, right?
Right.
It's not
Right.
it's not the remains of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so even so, when we talk about the majority of the world putting up some opposition to this U.S. hegemony, this I think is a process that is inevitable, right? It's a process that's not going to stop. Empires come and go,
Mm-hmm.
and this empire is looking as if it is, in its, I would say, death throes. Now, death throes can be very dangerous, right?
Right.
If
Right.
someone is drowning, you have to know how to approach them. Otherwise, they grab hold of you, and
And
everyone
you
dies.
drown too.
Yeah, everyone is destroyed. And so we're in a situation where nations with nuclear weapons are threatening to use those nuclear weapons if they feel that their existence is threatened. And this is a very dangerous time. So the issue we're going to talk about, I guess, reparations
Mm-hmm.
today, but this is certainly in a context that I think is um, even more important than reparations. Although reparations is very important on an international and national and local scale.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when we're talking about the need for reparations, what we're talking about is the need to repair the damage
Mhm,
done to a group of people that emanated from policies that grew this empire, right? That solidified, established the United States as an economic force.
mhm,
Um, Certainly helped grow the military of the United States to back up that economic power with
mhm,
military power, which of course grew the United States as an imperialist nation, imposing its hegemonic will upon other countries around the world. But it's the damage to the people that they started that project with
mhm,
that is the basis for reparations. And to be fair, to be clear, the conversation we are going to have tonight is about the damage to just one of the groups of people, because and that is
mhm,
the Africans in this country. We're not talking about what this means, what reparatory justice means for indigenous people, although that needs to be a part of the conversation. But I just want to put it out there right now. We're talking about in this conversation, because of the work that you are doing, reparations for the victims of racial discrimination in Kansas City in particular, because
Mhm.
that's where you live. But this does not mean that we do not recognize that Indigenous people need to be a part of this larger reparations conversation.
Yes, that's very important. In fact, in August, mid-August, there's going to be a conference held in Lawrence, Kansas. Lawrence, Kansas is about 30 minutes from Kansas City. It's where the University of Kansas is.
Mhm.
This will be this conference is called the Freedom and Justice Conference. It's being sponsored by three organizations. One is the National Economics Association, of which I'm a past president,
Mhm.
and that started in 1969 as the Caucus of Black Economists within the larger American Economic Association. So it's past its 50th year history. Another organization is the American Society for Hispanic Economists, is also a part of this conference. And the last organization is the Association for Economic Research of Indigenous People,
Fantastic.
which includes our Native American or Native Indian population. Is being held at the Haskell Native Indian University in Lawrence, Kansas. And so I am, in fact, and a student of mine are doing a paper on reparations for that conference as well.
Oh, that would be great. That would be a great follow up. But tonight, let's talk about your work on reparations in Kansas City in particular. And I want to start
Mhm.
with a news clip that I found about the panel, Kansas City's Commission on Reparations. And let me make sure you
For the
can.
first time, Kansas City's Committee on Reparations met this afternoon. It's looking at ways to make amends for generations of segregation. AMBC 9's Brian Johnson takes us inside.
Yeah, Kansas City is one of 12 cities in the country already looking at or paying out reparations, and this new commission is tasked with studying what can be done here locally in Kansas City. Now, today was the commission's first meeting. The group has 5 impact areas: housing, economic development, health, education, and criminal justice. The group will identify any damage done to Black residents, who is responsible, and any reparations that could begin to repair those damages. Now, the group says the median white household income has a net worth 10 times greater than the median Black household income. And some forms of reparations that they may consider are direct payments, land, tax relief, scholarships, free healthcare, or funds for home building or home buying.
And I hope people who are reluctant to believe in this as even a viable opportunity see that, yeah, it's not about fighting 200 years back. It's about actually finally doing the right things to build up the entirety of our community.
There are a lot of things on the table this afternoon. They're looking at all of them. We're going to get more information. We're going to talk to the mayor. We'll have that for you coming up tonight at 10. That's the latest in Kansas.
So, excuse me. Tell us about this commission that you are on. I don't know if you all noticed, but Dr. Tauheed was present at that meeting. He was kind of in the middle of the round table there. Um, Tell us about this commission. How did it get started? Who started it? And I think the first meeting was in May.
Mhm.
That report was from May. And, catch us up on what has happened since then.
Yes, the Kansas City, officially called the Mayor's Commission on Reparations in Kansas City, was that process was motivated and pushed forward by activists in the community, that is called the Kansas City Reparations Coalition. It's an organization that has been operating under that title for a couple of years. And one of the, and As an outcome of their work in the community, educating, but also in talking to the mayor and city council members in Kansas City. The Kansas City has, of course, a mayor, but also has 12 city council members,
Mhm.
right? Kansas City is divided into 6 council districts, and each district has an in-district and an at-large representative, right? And so those 12 council members and then the mayor making the 13th voted in April to commission the mayor's commission on reparations to moving forward. So the I guess the impetus for that came from the Kansas City Reparations Coalition. That process was that the coalition submitted names to the mayor for persons to be on the commission. The mayor also had some picks for the commission. We ended up with a 13-person commission, and so yes, in May was our May 23rd, if I remember, was our first meeting. We've had a meeting in June. We're scheduled to have a meeting at the end of July here, and so at least right now we're meeting once a month to get organized. We're doing obviously lots of organizing outside of the meeting. Now those meetings are held at City Hall or elsewhere, and they are publicly advertised and publicly viewed meetings. They can be viewed on the on Zoom or on social media, but also of course persons can come in person for that meeting, and so they're community persons who prompted the mayor, lobbied the mayor and council members to get this done. The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was a majority, right, for this commission, and so we're going forward.
That's fantastic. So the news report said that there are 5 impact areas that the commission is considering, and I looked up, excuse me, just a couple of interesting things about some of these impact areas. One of them in particular is housing. And I looked up, what is this? This is a report from the Mid-America Regional Council. This is one of the focus areas of the commission, and that is housing. And this is a report on the history of racial discrimination in housing that still impacts Kansas City today. And this is from March of this year, 2023. And I just scrolled down to the middle of the page, and where they say housing segregation between races in the Kansas City region began as a private practice. As Black Americans increasingly migrated to Kansas City after the Civil War, many communities implemented racially restrictive covenants to ensure housing segregation. And I just want to note that this didn't just happen in Kansas City. This happened all across the country.
Right.
So this is an aspect or a focus area of whatever reparations campaign is happening in, I think the news reporter said 12 cities across the country. This is something that has impacted everywhere in this country.
Yeah. Housing is a very interesting place to start. And Sister Jacqueline, you always do your research, so it's great. Housing in Kansas City, in terms of discriminatory practices, have an interesting history. That article mentioned a person named J.C. Nichols. Don't know what J.C. stands for, but J.C. Nichols is a paragon of rightness in Kansas City. In fact, in an area that is about mid city. There is the J.C. Nichols fountain, a large fountain that was dedicated to J.C. Nichols. He was a real estate mogul in Kansas City, and it was J.C. Nichols who came up with the idea of restrictive covenants in deeds, right? And those restrictive covenants that J.C. Nichols put into all of his deeds prevented the persons who purchased property in white neighborhoods from selling that property to African Americans, to Blacks, and Jews, right? And so those restrictive covenants Yeah, the article says comes out of private practice, and yes, it came out of his private practice, but we need to say more about that. But those restrictive covenants that J.C. Nichols initiated became through his influence on HUD policy around the country.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't just the case that this is a private issue. And so there's no governmental involvement in this. No, government picked up the restrictive covenants that he developed. And of course, cities and states and the US government enforced those restrictive covenants, right? They became the process of enforcement of those. I mean, after all, if J.C. Nichols says that, if a deed says you can't sell to blacks, and someone actually does that, it's not J.C. Nichols that has a court that he sues in. He sues in the court of jurisdiction to prevent that from happening. So it was always, even though it was private action, government has been the handmaiden of private action and private wealth building, not just in this country,
Mm-hmm.
so government is not insulated from the effects of private action, because private action relies on government to carry out its mandates. And so, the one of the mandate of the Kansas City reparations commission, as has been the mandate of all of what we call local or state level uh, reparations, is to look at the involvement of Kansas City government in housing, in health, in education, in criminal justice, and in economics. I missed that, and in the economic aspects of life for black persons, black citizens in Kansas City. And so that's the charge of the commission. We're not charged to look out at private enterprise,
Mm.
but we will find lots of entwinement and entanglement of private enterprise agendas in what government ends up doing in terms of housing, for example, in terms of zoning or redlining, at least enforcing redlining, and allowing disparate interest rates and so forth. These are all parts of an economy, of the housing economy, that's regulated by government. And government is duplicitous in the process of discrimination, even if it comes from private enterprise.
So that leads me to the question of how do the private enterprises that have benefited, uh, handsomely is not even an accurate word for the real estate agents, the insurance companies,
Mm,
the healthcare companies, the private enterprises that have made their billions, millions, billions,
yeah.
possibly trillions off of the discrimination of African descended people. How are they made to pay for their part in influencing or providing the template for policy that the government then enforced for them? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yes, and it's a good question. Now, I'm going to kind of repeat the mandate of the commission is to stay within the bounds of Kansas City policy, right?
Right.
Now,
Right.
that doesn't mean that other enterprises, private enterprises, should not be approached and lobbied, and that a strategy for extracting what a colleague of mine, Richard America, calls unjust enrichment,
Mm,
right?
mhm,
There should be a way of calculating what that unjust enrichment is. Now we're talking in dollars in this sense, what that unjust enrichment is, or what that damage is from the actions of private enterprise, in a way that gives us an idea that what needs to be done in the process of repair for the damage that's done. Right. So it's an evaluation process of history, And then there will be an estimation of what is owed, I suppose. We shouldn't think of what's owed only in monetary terms, right? And we'll have a larger discussion on that. But if we're talking about criminal justice, for example, there certainly is an economic component. Heck, there's a health component. There's a even a housing component to the criminal justice issue in terms of,
Yeah.
for example, persons who are have been convicted of crimes, not being able to get mortgages and so forth. And so all of these areas are interconnected, right? But you're correct. The reparations movement as it stands in Kansas City is mostly, even at the local or national level, is mostly focusing on government involvement in that process. But private enterprise should not be let off the hook in this process, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
this commission doesn't have the authority, if you will, to look directly at private enterprise, but I would be really, really surprised if we don't trip across some private enterprise in the process of thinking about of researching the reparations issue here in Kansas City, and that's the case everywhere.
Now, do you think that that is an intentional, obviously
Mhm.
political move? Because so many folks on these city councils, I mean, I'm in Washington, D.C., our city council is heavily influenced by the real estate
Yes.
industry. Um, do you think that that was a political move?
In,
Clearly,
in terms of the headline on that article.
uh,
Yeah, yes,
yeah,
I think it is obviously pointing out that our private enterprise has had some involvement in this, some involvement, right? But the stories like this are tending to say it's all the government's fault,
mm,
that private enterprise has not been involved in this. And yeah, I think there was some definite headline creation there that was intended to steer our vision away from private enterprise, right?
right. Hmm.
And to governmental action.
So I've got this is a great comment in the chat here. James says that folks in Missouri got ran out of their homes, and the
Mhm.
descendants still have the titles to their homes, but white people live in them now. um this is a part of Kansas City or Missouri history, I guess, that I didn't know, a discrete part of Missouri history that I
Mhm.
didn't know, but that, I mean, it's typical of every other act of racist terrorism like that. I'm thinking of the Cicero attack on the black family that tried to move into the apartment, and rather than have that, so they had to have secured a lease to the
Mhm.
apartment to move into there. They had to come back with a court order because the sheriff ran them off the day that they tried to move it. The first day they tried to move in, it came back with a court order, so they had to have a lease. But rather than uh, just let people live, the white residents of Cicero
Mhm.
not only ran the black family out of the neighborhood and destroyed all of their belongings, they burned the entire building down,
Mhm.
which made the white residents homeless as well.
Mhm.
So that, but this is the psychopathy, the illogic of racism. And it's that there's no logic behind hate.
Yeah.
So how is the commission um focusing on redress for those kinds of incidents where people have been robbed quite literally of property
Mhm.
that was theirs? They have the deed for it, and now someone else lives in the property.
Okay. Let me say this as a member of the commission. What I've determined that I'm going to do or not do is at least to preempt any decisions that my other
Hmm.
12 commissioners might come to,
Makes
right?
sense. Yes.
But in general, we've agreed that there is a process of research
Hmm.
of looking back in history to find what we're calling harmful events.
Hmm.
If this was a law a legal case where someone slips on the sidewalk, in front of your house, and they're damaged by that. That's a potentially harmful event. It is up to you set in motion a lawsuit that is going to go back and collect evidence of neglect or intent to cause harm. And out of that process, there is first the deciding that there was harm done intentionally or unintentionally, right? And then the second phase of those type of trials is to determine what the damages are and
Hmm.
what would compensate. Of course, if it was intentional, there's an additional compensation that's called punitive damages that's put on this. I'm not a lawyer, but I guess I'm playing one on your show today. And so there are a couple of stages, right? The first thing we have to do is to go back and collect the evidence for
Hmm.
this. And so what the Reparations Commission in Kansas City is doing now is we are in the process of sending out what we call requests for informations
Okay.
for researchers,
Hmm.
for persons who can conduct the research that we need to be conducted in the 5 areas mentioned. And we're doing that. We're getting. We haven't sent the RFI out yet, but we will do that shortly. And when we get researchers information back, we'll hold interviews to decide on who we're able to hire going forward to do that work. Now there are a couple of things that to said about that hiring is one is that it will require money funding for it, right?
Right.
And as of yet, the city has not figured out a way to provide that funding.
Oh, really?
Well, we are in the state of Missouri.
Mm.
We probably all know about the San Francisco Reparations Commission that did its work. That was very much funded by the city of San Francisco. Then there was the larger California Reparations Commission
Hmm.
that was funded and resourced by the governor of California and the Attorney General of California. That office. We know about the reparations process in Evanston, Illinois.
Right. Hmm.
When we're talking about California, Illinois, we're talking about states that are led by Democrats. Missouri is a state that's led by Republicans, not only a Republican governor, but I think 75%, 75 to 25 majority in the Missouri House and Senate. And so Kansas City being a city in Missouri makes it perhaps a little politically there's a political obstacle to cities funding these efforts. So what we are doing is raising money
Hmm.
from private enterprise, from philanthropic enterprises, and from individuals. And we don't have a payment system set up yet. But when we do, I certainly want to come back and let your members know about it. But let me say this:
Yeah.
I have an email, a Gmail
Hmm.
that I've set up just for the reparations work.
Oh, good.
And if persons like the person who mentioned about the historical event in Missouri, if persons watching or elsewhere want to send me information, either historical information or just keep in contact, they can send it to it's easy. It's LFT Linwood F Tauheed LFT dot
Hmm.
reparations at gmail.com.
Fantastic. That's
So
fantastic.
you can send me that, and I will keep your your tribe. Uh, presenters, audience or viewers or so forth. This we'll say we'll keep your tribe informed.
That is fantastic because I like giving our people homework so they can feel connected into the work that we do on this show. This is a people's platform. So thank you for providing a way for people to be in contact with you on this issue.
Right.
So you receive all of the information or a good amount of information in the interest areas or the focus areas.
Mhm.
um and there's another, let me see, let me go up. Rashi Johnson Edmond says scholarships to urban youth, investment in beautification in the neighborhoods they distressed. Excuse me, there are many ways the
Mhm.
capitalists can return their ill-gotten gains. Now, of
Yes.
course, we understand you can't preempt decisions that the commission would make
Oh,
because
no,
the
no.
commission hasn't made any decisions yet.
Right, yeah, but we're certainly in information gathering mode. So again,
Right.
if persons here want to send me like that just comment, send that to me, and that becomes, because part of this is, of course, there's a public hearing process
Hmm.
that we're going to go through. We want to hear from obviously the citizens in Kansas City. Now, some of those citizens we'll hear from will be opposed to reparations. We'll hear them as well. But certainly those in the Black community and elsewhere in Kansas City who have information about things that have happened to them or their family members or on a larger basis, we want to gather all of that information because that gives us clues as to where the research should go, right?
Right.
And no one person is smarter than all of us, right? We
Hmm.
with all of us, we know we have all of the information we need, and it's to compile that in one place is part of this process. Now, after the course, the commission has an 18-month time frame for this project. After 1 year, we are to present a preliminary report, and then 6 months after that, the final report. This process and the way it's organized is very much organized the way other reparations commissions have been organized around the city, around the country. So there are templates for this. The five impact areas are the areas that have been used in California and Evanston and other places where there have been reparations commissions. And so we're not doing what we're in that regard. We're not breaking new ground, but we
Right.
are doing so in Kansas City uh,
Right.
with Kansas City's history. And so this is the kind of work that has to be done everywhere, right?
Yes.
In every city, in every small
Hmm.
town, in every state, and so forth. But there is a difference that we should talk about between local reparations and national reparations. And
Yeah.
and my colleague Sandy Darity, that I know you know of, he and
Hmm.
Kirsten Mullen have written a book, From Here to Equality, right?
Hmm.
Talking about reparations on a national level.
Right.
Um, there is, there is a limitation, a financial limitation that cities have in terms of
Hmm.
being able to provide money. I mean, but the federal government has no such financial limitation,
Right.
and it's demonstrated that, to say that the federal government can has no limitations on spending, let's say 50 years ago, was something that people might push back on. But we get into these 2008 housing crisis, and we find
Hmm.
that the money is flowing into finance almost you know, in at trillion-dollar levels, right?
Right.
I mean, $1 billion used to be a lot of money.
And I always lose track of just how much a trillion is
Yeah,
compared to a billion. So
yeah,
a trillion is like one, is it 1,000
it's a
billions?
thousand billion, and of course, a billion is 1,000 million,
Right.
right? and a million is 1,000,000. So whenever we go from a million to billion to trillion, we're going 1,000 times, and so we're talking about lots of money. I think I mentioned on this program and certainly elsewhere that some of my colleagues and students at UMKC estimated that there were transactions totaling $29 trillion between the Federal Reserve and financial institutions as a result of the 2008 crisis. So 29 trillion. Now, Professor Darity and Mullen have estimated that there's about a 11 to 14 trillion dollar bill that the federal government owes to African Americans, to Black folks in this country, in order to repair the damage, to return the unjust enrichment to them. The federal government can do that because the federal government, and it's not $14 trillion all at once. The program that Darity and Mullen argue is that this should be over a 10-year period. Well, the Federal Reserve Bank has been, even since 2008, has been sending, by a process called quantitative easing, about $1 trillion a year into finance since then. And so
since when? I'm sorry again.
Since 2008. It just
so
stopped. Of course, when the pandemic came along, there were additional trillions that were sent out to pharmaceutical companies and other entities, and payments into unemployment insurance and other kinds of things that were in fact necessary for the economy not to go into depression. Everyone, even conservatives, voted for that process, right, of sending money into the economy, understanding that the federal government had the money to provide. But the Federal Reserve Bank itself, when it sends money into the economy, that doesn't affect the debt, the national debt. It just becomes an entry on the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve Bank.
Yeah, despite what you believe, folks, it doesn't run up the debt.
Right. And it is a way for the federal government to finance reparations payment at the level that it should be. Local governments, of course, don't have that. The city of Kansas City can't print money.
Right. They rely on tax revenue, right?
Right. Tax revenue. And so there needs to be inventive ways of getting the repair done, some of which will not involve monetary payments, right? But some of which can or should involve monetary payments, and that's for the commissioners to figure out. Once we have the evidence, then we can begin to create a solution of repair.
Okay, 2 questions. I want to ask the question in the chat first. 2Fs wants to know if you can talk about the importance or insignificance of public apologies and public outreach in terms of educating the public at large about the reasons for reparations, the history of oppression. That's a great question. I like
it. It is. And the second part of the question in terms of public outreach is certainly something that we are is part of the process of the commission here, and also of the coalition. Now, the coalition, as commissioners, we're appointed by the mayor and the city council, and we swear to uphold the Constitution.
Yes, I saw you.
And so there are certain things that if we're in a political environment. And so we have a mayor who, by the way, Mayor Quentin Lucas is part of a larger group of mayors. I think there's 7 of them around the country who promised, made part of their agenda to create reparations commissions. There's also the mayor of St. Louis on the other side of Missouri is also involved in this process. But when you're doing things under government action and you're you're doing it as a public forum, right? We have the
Mhm.
sunshine law, so you have to do that. There are perhaps certain things that you do and certain things that you don't do. The Reparations Commission, which is not a governmental body, right, is has taken on the major responsibility for educating the public about reparations, the history of the rationale for it, and of what's going on around the country and around the world in terms of reparations. So there's a division of labor here in that the coalition is doing most of the quote the public outreach, but the
Mhm.
commission also, as I said, we will have public hearings where we want to hear from citizens in Kansas City about what they think about reparations and what they're and they will add some evidence to our list. Now, the first part of the question was about apologies,
Mhm.
and there is an apology. Let me do this. Let me
Yeah.
read the ordinance. It's a very short ordinance.
Yeah, please.
It says it's ordinance number expressing apologies on behalf of the city of Kansas City and declaring the city's intent to make amends for its participation in the sanctioning of the enslavement of Black people and any historical enforcement of segregation and accompanying discriminatory practices against Black citizens of Kansas City, encouraging others to join the city in this effort, and establishing a commission within 90 days to be known as the Mayor's Commission on Reparations to advise the city regarding reparations issues. That's the ordinance. And so that's the ordinance that give us our charge. And you see, it starts off with an apology.
Mhm.
Apologies are perhaps a place you start, but it is very much only a start. Um, uh, the numbers, and I don't have the numbers at hand. I certainly don't have the numbers for Kansas City because these kind of numbers have not been generated in terms of support for reparations. Majority of blacks, of African Americans support reparations. Majority of whites don't support reparations.
Surprise, surprise.
But yes, but that number actually for whites not supporting reparations and the number of blacks supporting reparations has been increasing, right?
Hmm.
It's been moving up. I guess there was an article by Ta-Nehisi Coates
Mhm.
some years ago that was a national, I think it
Yes.
was in the Atlantic,
The
right?
case for reparations.
State
Yeah.
reparations, and
Mhm.
so that may have been many people's first introduction to the idea of reparations. And that article started some persons to take sides before, for and against.
Mhm.
But there have been other articles since then, and Professor Darity and Mullen's book has also made a case. It's not just this is how much you owe, but this is why you owe, right? These are the things that
Right, right.
historically, and one of the pushbacks, of course, that many people who are opposed to reparations give is that, well, if that's reparations for slavery, that was 150 years ago, and I wasn't involved in that.
Right,
In
right.
fact,
That was so
in
long
fact, in,
ago.
in fact, many people will argue that they have no family members who have ever benefited from slavery.
Mhm.
Um, uh, and if it was only about that, if when enslavement in this country ended, the discrimination against the black community ended, then that would be a different type of story.
Right.
Now, it might be a different type of story, like the 40 acres and a mule that was commissioned by General Sherman. That was actually started the process of distributing that 40 acres and a mule to formerly enslaved African Americans. Um, uh, some would argue that had that been allowed to continue, that would have been the restitution for enslavement. In fact, the 13th Amendment is, I guess, puts forward the idea that the federal government should do things to eliminate the disadvantage that slavery caused. I'll put
Hmm.
it disadvantage.
Mhm.
but that was given and it was taken away.
Right.
And so now, as opposed to individuals who may or may not have any connection to that, the federal government is a going concern. It is still in business. It didn't
Hmm.
end to become a different government after that. It reneged on its agreement. It didn't follow the I guess the dictates, or at least the it didn't follow the 13th Amendment in terms of its intention, and that's still left on the table to do. But
Right.
but but of course there is after emancipation from slavery there were black codes and
Hmm.
other actions that are governmental actions supported by the federal government that came into place, only to come off the books
Right.
in 1964 and 1965 with the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts. But that was off the books. There were still action in terms of discrimination that was harmful to blacks. That was in fact part of life in this country, and is still part of life in this country. And so that apology, which apologizes for the past, is in very many cases apologizing for yesterday. It's not that far in the past.
Right,
If you
right.
think
We're
about
not we're not just talking about, 1850, before 1856.
it. Right,
We're talking about everything, inclusive of vagrancy laws
right.
that came out of that post Civil War period
Hmm.
that are still on the books in many jurisdictions in this country.
Yep,
Um,
convict labor laws still on the
exactly.
books.
Exactly. The fact that the 13th Amendment still codifies slavery as long as you're convicted of a crime.
Yes,
That's,
yes,
that's
exactly.
so that's today still. Something I came across that is really kind of fascinating to me. One of the ways, since we started talking about housing, one of the ways that racial oppression and discrimination and denial of opportunity was carried out in this company in this country. It's still kind of accurate in this country, was through not just, we talked about earlier, the restrictive covenants, but there were entire towns in this
Hmm.
country
Hmm.
that were called sundown towns.
Right.
But did you all know that they didn't just disappear and stop
Hmm.
being sundown towns? Apparently, and I'm sharing this because this is fascinating, and I think that this is a part of that calculus of, we're not talking about 150 years ago what was done in this country. We're talking about what continues to be done in this country to black people, and we need to face it, because a lot of people who don't live in these areas have no idea that sundown towns, some of them kind of do still exist. There
Hmm.
is this historical database of sundown towns, and this is published by an outlet called History and Social Justice. I was doing the research for this
Hmm.
show, doing a little, just looking at some stuff for this show, and came across this. And they define a sundown town very specifically. They say a sundown town is not just a place where something racist happened. That would
Hmm.
be everywhere in this country. It is an entire community or even county that for decades was all white on purpose. All
Hmm.
white is in quotes because some towns allowed one black family to remain when they drove out the rest. Also, institutionalized persons in prisons, hospitals, colleges, etc., live in servants in white households, and black or interracial children
Hmm.
in white households do not violate that taboo.
Hmm.
Um, they say that on purpose does not require a formal ordinance.
Right.
If, for example, a black family tried to move in, encountered considerable hostility, and left, that would qualify the town as sundown, according to their definition. Note that some sundown towns kept out Chinese Americans, Jews, Mexican Americans, Native Americans, even Mormons. So, understanding that that's what they mean by sundown town, I clicked on Missouri.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And they say that this is a list in this list is a work in progress. But these are all of the towns in Missouri that have been considered sundown towns according
Mm-hmm.
to this database. There's an asterisk beside Ferguson. Let's see what that's.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't look at this, so I,
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea what the information looks like. So we're all seeing it at the same time for the first time. Let's see. There's Ferguson, Missouri, sundown town status. Was it a sundown town in the past? Was there an ordinance? No. Was there a sign? No. Years of greatest interest,
Mm-hmm.
2014. Is it still a sundown town? Surely not. I'm trying to see why there's an asterisk.
Yeah,
I
I think there was a note in the original story about
Okay.
Ferguson, but Ferguson here. In reading through that quickly, Ferguson, of course, is a majority black city today,
Mm-hmm.
but it was also a city that I don't think has a very long history. Ferguson, Missouri, is the way I understand it, is kind of a suburb that grew out of white flight out of St. Louis.
Right.
And
Right.
then because of the way that the school system was operating in Ferguson as opposed to the school system in St. Louis, the St. Louis school system being underfunded and so forth, as it became a suburban area, its schools were performing better, and so black folks started to move out to Ferguson,
Mm-hmm.
which then turned even though Ferguson has a black population, its elected officials are majority white, and then put in processes in Ferguson. Not it's almost the opposite of a sundown town, in the sense that the majority black population in Ferguson wasn't run out.
Right.
It
They
was
were
it was
contained.
they were contained and financially exploited, right?
Right.
In other
Mm.
words, you can stay here, but you have to pay extra in order to do that. Sometimes with your lives or the lives of your children, but certainly with excess fines and excess taxes. In other words, so Ferguson in this case didn't exist historically as a sundown town, but has become a town of exploitation of black folks. Now, Ferguson was kind of the beginning of the process of studying that phenomena around the
Mm.
country.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That is, how much do small municipalities depend on the criminal justice system to extract money from the black community in order to keep it going? And we find that this is a phenomena that exists around the country, and it's not just Ferguson.
Yeah, that's it. And the note, the comment that they have says that according to John A. Wright Kinlock, Missouri's first black town, I guess this is the book called Kinlock, Missouri's
Mm-hmm.
first black town,
Mm-hmm.
Ferguson blocked the main road to Kinlock, the tiny black suburb to its west, with chains, trying to keep out black residents.
Mm-hmm.
Between 1940 to 1960, while Ferguson's white population grew, that's amazing. While Ferguson's white population grew by over 400%, by almost 400%
Mm-hmm.
in just 20 years, its black population was cut by 60%.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, the black population of the St. Louis metropolitan area doubled from just under 150,000 to just under 300,000. Of course, they talk about Ferguson in 2014 receiving national attention for what seems to be an example of what you talked about, a second generation sundown town problems.
Right.
problems. Such problems linger in former sundown towns and suburbs that are obviously no longer all white on purpose.
Hmm.
Ferguson never quite attained sundown town status, but it did use DWB, driving while black policing and realtor steering, as well as the above noted chains, to get as white as it could.
Yeah.
In 2014, the police force had just 3 blacks out of 50 officers. Considering that it just makes sense to send black officers to the site of black disturbances and white officers to white disturbances, such a ratio is not competent. So, this is a fascinating resource, and it
Mm.
might be that they are listing all of the cities in
Well,
a state and giving a little bit of history. I'm not sure, but I just thought that
Kansas
this
City
was
was not on that list, so
a,
it's not all the cities, but perhaps
okay,
but perhaps these are, the designation to be a city is that you have to have over 100,000 residents. If
right.
you're by the census, if you're under 100,000, you're considered a town. So maybe there are no towns, no cities on that list, just towns.
Okay, so so apparently this is a list of cities or towns that were considered sundown towns. And the note for Ferguson says that it's not a suspected sundown town, but it is of interest for other reasons. And the reasons they gave are the ones they gave in the description of the city. So understanding, Dr. Tauheed, that if we click on any state in that map,
Hmm.
there are going to be there's going to be a list just like that
Right.
of every state, of
Mhm.
so many cities across this country, understanding that this is not a locality problem. This
Hmm.
is a nation problem.
Right.
This isn't a small town is better problem. It's just ridiculous, this conversation that's going on right now because of that dumb country song. But
Right.
this is not country folks are better and small towns are
Hmm.
better. This is what America is problem.
Yeah.
How do you frame the justification for reparations in a country in which none of this history
Hmm.
and none of this current legacy that remains
Hmm.
because of this unaddressed history has been resolved? None of it. it
Yeah.
and the system of capitalism that was grown off of and became what it is here in this country off of the oppression of our people and our indigenous cousins has also that's still around.
Uh,
How do you justify reparations in a system that remains, the oppressive system that created this?
The first, I think the first way of justifying that, the first thing that needs to be done, is to create a record of the harms, and that's what these reparations projects are doing. They're compiling evidence of harm, not just of Sundown Nation, yes, not just the harms that were done in times way past, but also harms that are continuing to be done. But even the harms that were done in the past are create harms today. I mean, it would, someone who was fortunate enough to have a wealthy aunt 100 years ago who died and left money to their family.
Mm-hmm.
There is an intergenerational transmission of that wealth from one generation to the next. And so persons who are living today who have had inheritances into their family from hundreds of years ago are still benefiting from that inheritance. It's of course the opposite as well.
Mm-hmm.
Those who have had unjust enrichment, who have had financial opportunities and other types of opportunities like education opportunities and housing opportunities taken from them in the past, their descendants are still suffering from that. And also those who benefited at that time, that great aunt who gave that inheritance may have been able to give that inheritance because they were had discriminatory practices that made them wealthy, right? Those things continue to go on. If we were talking about a private discussion, there are debts that parents incur that become debts of their children.
That's
Look, if you buy a house and the homeowner dies and there's still a mortgage on the house, that
true.
that mortgage doesn't go away. If the descendants want to keep that house, they have to continue to pay that mortgage, right? There's
That's
still
true.
a debt that
Hmm.
goes over. And so these in just in a private situation, assets and liabilities continue forward, right? And so the idea now, how to make it so that persons who want to deny, persons who have benefited from this process, want to say that, I didn't participate and I don't know of anyone who participated. The process is to show the harmful events that have occurred, and to link that to the continuing lack of resources, financially, health-wise, educationally, that exists in the Black community. That is, there's a harmful event that has carried itself through history. That's an educational process, and as a result of the educational process, I think there is an increase in support for reparations, even among whites. I'm thinking that the last number that I remember is 29 in a survey. 29% of whites support reparations, which is, as I remember, about twice what it was 10 years ago.
Wow.
It's a matter of laying the case out, of saying that this is not an abstract exercise. This is a process of doing research and laying out evidence for the harm that has been done, and that there that people should want to remediate, remedy, repair that harm that was done by their ancestors to persons who are living today.
So then there is the response that, say we do get reparations in our lifetime, and
Mhm.
however that will look, I don't, whether it's cash payments, whether it's these other things, these other, doesn't matter. Say
Mhm.
we get reparations in our lifetime. All the system, the powers that be, white people are going to do is move the goalposts so that what we receive in reparations is almost meaningless. It
Mhm.
is almost, it doesn't do us any good, because let's say we get cash payments, the people who control the market are just going to price us out of being able to use that money for anything substantive. So how do you address that
Well,
response?
I wrote an article that we discussed on
Mm-hmm.
the program some time ago. What we must do before reparations,
Yes.
and for me, certainly in my thinking, that is something that the Black community must do in order for reparations to have the intended effect, right? Even if, for example, at the federal level, there is a process by which now 11 to 14 trillion, as time goes on, the wealth gap increases, and so
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
that goes up, right? But even if we start to receive those payments without an infrastructure to make sure that that wealth that comes in a lump sum continues to circulate and continues to build wealth in the Black community, without an infrastructure to ensure that money flows out into the rest of the community, right? I mean, after all, if we still have to buy, we have to have food, clothing, and shelter.
Right.
But if money is going to be used for food, clothing, and shelter, but we're not the producers of food, clothing, and shelter, then that money flows through our hands to others. So we have to seriously begin the process of organizing and developing a Black economy, an economy for Blacks in this country. Um, it, it's um, it's more than a notion. to do that.
Hmm.
But without it, reparations doesn't have the effect that we hope it will have. Right?
Yeah.
It won't do that. And so there's the work that has to be done to educate the public about the morality, the legitimacy and morality and necessity of reparations. But then there's also the internal struggle that we have to have as Black people to create, to organize ourselves in ways economically and educationally and other ways that we can maintain that repair,
Did
if
you
you
say
will.
organize? Is that what you said? Is
Oh,
that what
absolutely.
you?
It all. I mean, when you're talking about other people, it all starts with organizing, right? I
It
mean,
does.
I can get out of the bed in the morning and I can do what I want to do, but if I want to do it with just one other person, we got to plan something, you know. We got to organize, and so if we're talking about, of course, the Black community, we have to. Now, one of the things that is, I think, very kind of a side effect, a very promising side effect, as we do these local reparations processes, is that we are aware that we're doing these local reparations processes. That is,
Hmm.
we had a forum here in Kansas City right after the commission was put in place. It was a forum that was held by the Reparations Coalition, right? And in that coalition, we had in that forum, which was a citywide forum. We actually held it at a charter school auditorium here, which was interesting because my understanding, it was said from the stage that the public schools were approached as to provide a venue for this discussion, and they declined. But a private school let us, had us, allowed us to use their auditorium, and the
Hmm.
auditorium was packed. It was
Wow.
full, probably at least 600 people, right?
Wow.
And so it was packed, and one of the persons was who came down from Evanston, Illinois, so Robin Roode Simmons was the leader of that reparations process in Evanston, and so she talked about Evanston
Hmm.
and what was being done there. And of course, we reach out to other local initiatives in terms of what needs to be done, or what they're doing, and we can get good ideas from them. They can get some ideas from us. But I'm hoping that that network of reparations commissions and enterprises that's going on will help us organize and create a network of national what we must do before reparations. That is,
Yeah.
once you have an organization, then you can mobilize in many directions. You don't have to just organize in the direction that it starts with. Organizing precedes mobilizing,
And
and we have this organizing process going around the nation that we,
mhm.
we need to we need to we need to unify these processes.
Yeah, and I like what you said, that when you mobilize, you don't have to mobilize in the direction that you began organizing in. When you start connecting different groups of people, even if you're organizing on the same issue,
Mhm.
you should be able to see connections
Right.
to between the issues that you are all gathered there for
Hmm.
and a bunch of other issues, which leads me to this question. And I think it's a great question. It's a comment kind of question. But Why Not Learn says, I don't think a meaningful reparations is possible without a socialist government in place. I could be wrong. I am also of the opinion that reparations is more likely to happen under a government controlled by the people. But this does not mean that we do not fight for, organize toward uh, kind of in between steps, in between victories that we can win on these fronts on the local level, kind of, at a lower level. But I don't know. That's how I see this, because I see the reparations issue coalescing, truly coalescing in something absolute, truly meaningful on a national level through kind of like a truth and reconciliation kind of commission, the way a lot of countries that had revolutions against colonial occupiers and have had to have that process to deal with the crimes that were committed by outside forces in there. So that's how I kind of see reparations happening on a national level.
Mhm.
I don't see reparations happening in a meaningful way on a national level in this current capitalist system.
Mhm.
But I see the advancements on the local level. But as you said, there are limitations to local actions. But how do you feel about that?
Well, let me say this, and maybe I won't. I don't want to startle your audience here, but I'm an evolutionist. I'm not a revolutionist. Now I'm going to say this. I have to explain what I mean by
Okay.
that. Things things nothing happens at once, all at once,
Right.
right?
Right.
Things
Absolutely.
happen in stages, and if you can lay out a plan for where you want to go, as you start to implement that plan, you certainly will find out that maybe you're not at some point heading in the direction that you want to go, and you have to make a course correction, right? Or there will be opposition to you wanting to get to where you need to go, and there will be course corrections that have to be made in order to move past the opposition. I on a national level, right? The national reparations process, as I think I've said before, will happen when we no longer need it. I guess I need to explain that too. That is, when we have the power to
Right.
force reparations on a national level, we'll have the power to force it. That at least means that we have to have a community organized
Hmm.
to project more power than those who are opposed to reparations can
Right.
project, right? And if that leads into a socialist, nationalist, governmental, process of governing and so forth, that's where it leads to, but that doesn't happen without the organizing. And,
Absolutely.
and, and so and so I don't think Kansas City or any other local entity should wait for socialism to organize for reparations. We have to organize for reparations, and in the process of doing that, we are learning, in what I would say an evolutionary way, that is step by step way,
Hmm.
how to organize for power, how to plan for the things we want, what things do we want, what things do we not want. And I would be surprised if in this local reparations process or any other national organizing process that we come out to the end of that and say, I think we want to continue with this capitalist mode of economics, but we will have learned how to do something different.
Mm.
You know, Socialism is a concept, but it is fairly abstract. We don't know how to do that yet.
I think that's a good point.
But in the process of doing these things on a local level, I think we can learn what we how we want to do these things, and get into a process of actually doing. There's a concept called building the road as you walk.
Mm. Hmm.
It's not going to be laid out for us easily. It's going to take hard work, and in that process, it's going to take some time, and we will evolve into a better form of government. It's not going to happen instantaneously. It has to
Exactly.
happen because we learn how to do it, and we implement it as we go.
And I think a part of the well, not I think, I know that a part of the organizing that we have to build is learning what alternative forms of economies and governance in other countries,
Mhm.
what it looks like, because it is true that we don't know how to do socialism. We as in people in this formation of this country, do not know how to do socialism, but people in other countries do.
Mm-hmm.
And while we can learn from them, from the way they do socialism, we also have to keep in mind
Yeah.
that socialism is not, it's not a cookie cutter kind of thing. It's
Yeah.
scientific socialism in particular forces you to look at your historical realities and frame what socialism would look like for your people based upon your history and the material conditions of your people that came out of that history. So maybe our socialism wouldn't look entirely like the way Cuba arrived at socialism. Maybe a socialist revolution in America wouldn't entirely look like the Venezuelan, the Bolivarian revolution. Maybe socialist revolution would not look like uh, Haiti's revolution, although I hope it does. I just I just really want some Haiti revolution to happen in this country right now. But the idea, I think, is, and we both agree on this, that none of this can happen without organization.
Right.
That it's just nothing that we want done, whether it is reparations on a local or state level, or some recognition of reparations on the federal level, and addressing and changing this exploitative capitalist system. That's It's not going to happen without reparations, without organization rather.
Mm-hmm.
And organizing, it takes work.
Mm-hmm.
That we're not talking about something that is easy to do. If it were easy to do, it would have been done.
Yeah. For example, I've been an education activist here in Kansas City, pretty much since I moved to Kansas City in the '70s. My three little children are now well grown, but they attended public school here, and their mother and I and others involved in those schools made sure that the educational level in those schools was top notch,
Hmm.
right? And then I became involved in the African centered school process here, which by the time I became involved in that, my children were out of school.
Hmm.
But part of the process is understanding, if you're just talking about education, how do you organize a school to get maximum performance for any and every child, right?
Hmm.
um, that's Yeah. There was a conference here in the state of Missouri. It would have been about 15 years ago. It was called by the Missouri Department of Education. There were about 500 educators that came from over the state to Jefferson City, which is the capital, to talk about how we close the achievement gap between Black and white students.
Hmm.
Now, I had been involved in a school, K-12 articulation that has not only closed the achievement gap between Black and white students, but actually opened up a new gap. Our students were performing higher than white students in the state of Missouri, and so forth. So
Wow.
we opened up a new gap. Um, I asked a question when I was at that forum of all of these educators. How many of you have ever been involved in a school that has closed the achievement gap between Black and white students? I got no responses. So my advice to them was, I'm involved in a school that has done that. If you're serious about doing that, you need to come and study what we've done.
Hmm.
And we can go around the country and we can find schools that have educated our children into excellence. You can't sustain an economy of any kind unless you have persons who are educated, who know how to do things, right? And that doesn't just mean college education. That means
Right. Right.
vocational education. It means
Hmm.
other different kinds of education. We kind of divide them into academic and vocational. We have to learn how to build things, right? And we've been denied the opportunity to learn how to build things. For example, here in Kansas City, we used to have a vocational school in the Black community. That school closed and opened up out in the suburbs. And
Same in DC.
I'm sure that's the pattern across the country.
Yeah.
We have to rebuild that process so that we can teach our children how to provide food, clothing, and shelter for ourselves. But there are examples of how to do that. That's part of an organizing process too.
Right.
And that's part of an organizing process that local reparations commissions can trade information, do what's called best practice patterning and so forth, to see how do we do this here, how do we do that there, understanding that communities are different and what might work, what might particularly work in one place may not particularly work somewhere else, but at least you have a place to start. and so this is a long process. Development is a long process. It doesn't happen overnight, right? Now you may get to an eventual revolutionary end, but it takes process. It takes steps to get there. And organizing is how you make those plans work. Excuse me.
No, it's quite all right. When we talk about revolutionary, excuse me, governments, we always, and I'm guilty of this too. We always talk about, Cuba and Venezuela, but we forget that we had successful revolutions on the continent that were destroyed by imperialism. And I'm thinking of right off the top of my head, the revolution in Burkina Faso, in which in just 4 years, the gains that were made in just 4 years of a revolutionary government kicking the colonialists out, and that were destroyed when a revolutionary leader, Thomas Sankara, was assassinated. That those successes need to be studied. Right. How did governments led by the people that allegedly had nothing in the way of the resources that we have today, how were they able to increase their literacy from in the single digits to over 80-90% of their entire population? How were they able to distribute land and seed and support farmers so that they could support small farms and support themselves? How were they able to improve health services for peasants and poor people, and even in the cities, so that there was an equitable a distribution of health services and an improved outcome in overall health in the entire country? How were they able to do these things? In organization is how you find these things out. Right. So we are not going to succeed in reparations or anything else we want in this country unless, once again, we are organized in pursuing a goal, and it is in the process of being organized with people who are examining how do we do these things. That's how we examine how others have done it and how we get an idea for our next steps. We don't have to do exactly the same thing, but we need to know that there is a roadmap. There are examples that we can follow.
Yeah. When I teach my development class, I always put up Cuba as an example of what can be done without a lot of money. Because in the standard development approach, it is you can't develop without money, and if you don't have any money, you have to borrow it from someone, the World Bank or the IMF, and they stand ready to make loans to quote developing countries, which of course becomes what we call a debt trap. The intention of that is to push loans or onto countries that they will never be able to repay in dollars or
Mm-hmm.
euros, but they can repay by selling off their assets, their mineral
Right.
rights, and other kind of things. That's the intention of these processes. Cuba, fortunately, has been insulated from that process because of the determination by the U.S. government of destroying it. And they have the Cuban people have decided that they're not going to be destroyed, that they're going to take their future into their own hands, not rely on the international others to do that. And what Cuba has been able to achieve with so little is absolutely remarkable. I mean, we're talking about literacy rates, 95% literacy rate.
Exactly. Yeah.
We're talking about a life expectancy higher than U.S. life expectancy,
Mm-hmm.
right? Infant mortality rates lower than U.S. All of those measures that are supposed to be the standard measures of, quote, development, Cuba has those with just a tiny gross domestic product, right?
Mm-hmm.
National income. And so Cuba is very much an example of, you may need money for some things, but some things you don't need money for. For example, after at the end of enslavement, 1865, you get the 1870 census, which includes all persons of African descent in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And the literacy rate among Black men was about 15% in 1870.
Mm-hmm.
That literacy rate went up to 85% by 1930. That the line is a very steep line, right? Well, how did we do that? I mean, we didn't. We took the funding we had. We created schools, right?
Mm-hmm.
Out of the little money we had, we built schools. Many of the schools that we built were built with our own hands
Right.
because we knew how to build things,
Mm-hmm.
right? And when we built those school buildings and we educated our children and we educated each other, each one teach one, so that literacy went from 15% to 85% in 60 years. Cuba achieved that much quicker than did in the U.S. But we have a history of when we had to produce, right?
Mm-hmm.
We produced, and so Cuba has had the advantage of having persons that wanted to destroy it, and therefore they had to be on their own. And we at one point we had it was very obvious
Right.
that persons in this society wanted to destroy us. We've gotten somewhat comfortable, I would say, with an idea that perhaps others we need others to do what we need to do. But our history tells us that when we organize and focus on what we need to do, we can get it done.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what do you want to leave us with about the Kansas City Commission on Reparations? What do we need to do other than providing you information to your email, which I provided everyone in the chat? What do we need to do to support?
Well, when if you're on the email and perhaps on this program in the future, I can say here's a GoFundMe site or something else that you can help us to fund this endeavor. We are, but in the interim, I think it's important if you're in a city or a state that does not have a local city or state reparations process going, that you should seriously contemplate and work to build that process, to bring that process together in your place. Kansas City Reparations Coalition The reparations coalitions out of San Francisco and California and Evanston are part of an organization and can help in the process of bringing that to your place.
Mhm.
And then perhaps at some point we need to organize maybe a conference or of all of these different entities in different cities to talk about how we plan for to make this more widespread. So I think there's an opportunity now because it is the process is growing and it's as the news clip said 12 cities.
Mhm.
Hopefully by this time next year it'll be in 120 cities. It'll be in 1200 cities after
Right.
that, so forth. So we can organize, we can move this process forward, and we can learn from things that are done in other places. So this is how I think you support Kansas City or support all these reparations process by beginning to organize your own reparations process in your own local area. And we stand and we we are anxious and we are pleasure to help you do so. Right.
Fantastic. Thank you so much once again for joining us and imparting your wisdom about all things economics and all things related to economics that we need to know about. And one of them, as always, is we need to be organized. I keep telling y'all, it just keeps coming up. I don't know why you just don't do it. So thank you so much, Dr. Tauheed, for joining us this Friday evening. We appreciate you so much.
Thank you very much, Sister Jacqueline. And I look forward as we go forward and our process unfolds that we can inform your community. That's what we'll call the community. We'll inform your community
That's right.
about how we're doing and be in the process of helping others do that also.
Great. Well, that's another episode of Black Economically Speaking, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We will see you next Friday in Lukman Nation for another People's Power Hour. And just stay tuned for next week. I think we may be back on Black Power Media by Tuesday, either Tuesday or Wednesday. I think we should be back streaming live, but we'll be back on Facebook and Twitter and Twitch for the Remix Morning Show on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday from 8 to 10
Yeah.
a.m. Yeah, just make sure that you are subscribed to Black Power Media so that when we're not under a strike, you get notification for when everyone uploads anything onto the channel. Check out the Gorilla University shows by Kalanji Jamachanga and Dr. Joy James. They are amazing. They are absolutely amazing. You do not want to miss that. That is good, solid, revolutionary content. Everything on the channel is fantastic. We've got more coming on Black Power Media. But tonight, thank you so much for joining us. As always, be good to yourselves and each other. Luta continua. The struggle continues. But if you keep struggling, I promise, Victoria Acerta. Peace.